This is Instructor Paul, and in this lecture, we're going to do our basic server configuration. There's three main things we're going to do in this lecture. We're going to install the VirtualBox Guest Edition CD image, we're going to rename the server, and we're going to configure a static IP address for the server. So first, let's start with the Guest Edition CD image. We can do that by hitting Devices on the VirtualBox window and choosing Insert Guest Edition's CD image. Now this is going to allow the VM to work more easily with VirtualBox. So things like dynamic resolution, copy and pasting between the VM and your host computer will all work better once this is installed. So once we do that, let's open the File Explorer and let's choose this PC. And here on the right, we can see the VirtualBox Guest Edition's images there. So we'll double click on this and I'm just going to launch the AMD 64. I'll click Next and we're going to go through with all the default options on this installation. So we're just going to click Next, and then once we get through this installation, I believe we'll have a couple of pop-ups. There we go. Would you like to install this device software? Make sure you choose Install. Okay, so now it's asking us if we want to reboot now or reboot later. We're going to reboot later because we're going to do some other things that also require a reboot. So we'll click Finish. Go ahead and close out of this window. I'm going to scroll up here and we're going to choose Local Server from the Server Manager dashboard. Now, if you don't see Server Manager, if you close out of the window or something like that, you can click the Start button and then Server Manager will be in the top left here. I also recommend that you right click here on the Server Manager icon and say Pin to Taskbar, as Server Manager is just one of those things that you're going to constantly be using. So let's go ahead and choose Local Server, and we can change the computer name by clicking here at the top. And it'll bring up System Properties. Now we can choose Change, and we can type in the name of our server. Now I'm going to use IP for Instructor Paul. You could do IT. It doesn't matter, what you want to name it. I'm going to use IPDC01. I think later on, I used ITFDC01 in this course, but it doesn't matter what you want to name it. I'm going to name it IP. DC stands for Domain Controller, since this is going to be a domain controller. 01 indicates it's the first domain controller in the domain. Since we haven't built a domain, we will not change this section here, and we'll just click OK. And we'll click OK again. We'll click Close, and we'll say Restart Later. Okay, so one last thing that we need to do here, let's click under the Ethernet settings where it says IP version 4 assigned by DHCP. Now, really quick, if we go to, I'm going to go ahead and open Command Prompt. So I'm going to scroll down, click the Start button, and open Command Prompt by typing in CMD and just launching Command Prompt. So if we type in the command ipconfig, so ipconfig all one word, and press Enter, we can see that our default gateway is 192.168.0.1, but our IP version 4 IP address is actually on a different network. So that's going to be a problem. And this is just an issue with VirtualBox's DHCP server. So if you remember, we enabled the DHCP server, but we changed the network to be a 192 address instead of a 10 address. However, the DHCP server is still assigning addresses on the 10.0.2 subnet. Or network rather. So this is just an issue with VirtualBox. It's a glitch that they're going to be working on. It may be fixed by the time you get to this, but that's just something to keep in mind. So we initially don't have internet connectivity. So what I'm going to do is minimize this, and I'm going to right click on the Ethernet here, and I'm going to choose Properties. So now we're going to uncheck IP version 6 because we're not using IP version 6 for this lecture or for this course. We'll choose IP version 4 and we'll click Properties. And we'll say use the following IP address settings. So now we're going to specify an IP address on the 192 subnet or network that we use. So 192.168.0, and then we can use any address from 2 to 254. And I'm going to use .10. So if I press tab, it auto completes the subnet mask for me, so I don't even have to enter that information. Now we'll go to the default gateway. And if you remember, under command prompt, the default gateway is listed there, and this is correct. So it'll be 192.168.0.1. So now into the DNS server, this is eventually going to be a domain controller, which will mean it'll also be a DNS server. So we can set this server to be the preferred DNS server. However, right now it does not actually have any DNS server roles, so we need to use a backup. So I'm going to just put 8.8.8.8, which is Google's DNS servers, and that will allow this server to reach out to the internet, things like that. Once we get this server installed as a domain controller, it has the DNS server role, we can get rid of this, okay? So I'm going to click OK. I'll click Close. And let's just check on these network settings here again. So we're going to type in ipconfig, and we'll press Enter. And I can see right away that this little box changed and now says I have internet access. So 192.168.0.10, that is indeed the IP that I configured. We'll test and make sure that we can ping the gateway here. So ping 192.168.0.1, and that worked. Let's ping the alternate DNS server. So ping 8.8.8.8. Okay. Now the final test would be trying to just ping anything else on the internet, even though we just did that. 8.8.8 is Google's DNS servers, but we can try and ping just google.com just for reassurance. And we're getting a response. So this server is indeed connected to the internet. Okay, so now what we're going to do is restart the computer by hitting the start button here, hit the power button and say restart, and we'll hit continue. Okay, so once this computer reboots, we've installed the VirtualBox Guest Edition CD image. We've configured a static IP address, which is always important anytime you're building a new server. Now, we've also renamed the computer so it'll be easy to tell what it's used for later on when our lab gets more complicated and we have more virtual machines in the network. So great job getting through this lecture. I sure did enjoy making this one, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next lecture.